Hi, everyone. I'm a little nervous. This is my first time doing this talk, so if you see me a little, shaky, that's what's going on. I'm so happy to be here, especially because Ro and I from BackerKit go way back from CCA, and I've seen her grow this company into this amazing community, and it's just, such touching to be part of it. So I'm here to talk to you about Angsty, and the main thing that I'm going to share is about my personal story. The biggest question I get asked is, why do I start a mental health magazine? And the answer to that question is my story. So Angsty started as a Kickstarter project, and it's a biannual publication trying to marry mental health and art. And art has played a big role in my life, and this is sort of what I'm going to share today. Our Kickstarter launched around September 2016, and we just shared what was like the big picture of the project. And we didn't really have anything tangible yet, and we were able to be pretty successful with the campaign, which led us to believe that there is actually a need for this type of content out there. We launched a second Kickstarter recently for our second issue, and what we're learning is that Kickstarter is becoming part of our model in terms of how we pre-order the magazine and fund our project. And the first thing I wanted to do was to show you our manifesto video, and hopefully that'll help you frame what we're trying to do.
Let's look at our inner worlds, the ones we often refuse to share, the secret hopes, the personal struggles, the fears that fool us into believing that the rest of the world is normal. We want to create a publication dedicated to eliminating the stigma around being sad, feeling stuck, or showing our vulnerabilities. A magazine focused on true understanding without judgment. Articles that cut through the clutter to offer real discussions about all the thoughts, feelings, and emotions buzzing in our heads. Let's share our stories, talk about those difficult moments, and explore how they affect our lives. Let's stop pretending we're flawless and have the courage to be our full selves. Angsty Magazine.
So to give more context for those of you who might be new to Angsty, these are our two first issues. One was about anger, and the other one is about workaholism. And I just wanted to show some spreads, just so you see the way we're carrying design and art through the magazine. Is, when you go out there and you see what's in the market for mental health content, I started to see it was like over-medicalized or even pathologizing, and the role of art was sort of left out. And that was the main inspiration for Angsty. And the reason why art is important to me is because it became a vehicle through where I was able to navigate my own story. And I know that this is not just unique to me. There's millions of people out there who are struggling with these issues, and many times they keep it really private. It's part of their inner world, it's part of their inner experience, and they're not necessarily sharing it. And what's happening is that we're going around the world, everyone's smiling, pretending everything's okay, and sort of suffering in silence or suffering on our own. And what we want to do is sort of say, hey, those experiences are part of our human fabric, and they're a part of what it means to exist in the world, and how can we make it okay to bring it into the fold so that we don't have to do this by ourselves. So through this process, I've dug deep into psychoeducation, which is the other part that we try to fold into Angsty. And the reason for that is because it's become a tool for me to understand myself. And a little bit of what I wanted to share, actually, when I read this out loud, is most of us emerge from childhood with conscious and unconscious psychotic wounds and emotional unfinished business. And I think that this is an actual fact, and the thing that I struggle with is this idea that that's not happening, that the experiences that we're having, somehow we need to keep it together, and they're not impacting how we navigate the world. A little bit about me. I was born in Dominican Republic, in Santo Domingo. The DR is a very interesting place because I kind of am a city girl, even though when people think of the Caribbean, they think about this beautiful kind of paradise and the beach and, tropical island. But the core aspect of my story centers around child sexual abuse. I'm a victim and a survivor of child sexual abuse from early age. And something that helped me stay together was that I had a lot of systems in place that supported me through my teenage years and eventually, coming here to the US. I went to this very structured high school, and in that high school, I was exposed to photography. And it was through photography that I started to sort of observe the world, and through that process, observe myself. And in that interest of photography that brought me into the world of design, it is actually very, very uncommon for someone to want to become a graphic designer in the Dominican Republic. You usually want to become an architect or a construction person or a doctor or a lawyer. The arts is not really what they consider a viable professional vehicle. So it took me quite some time to figure out my path, and my way in was that I went to the school in La Romana called Altos de Chabón, and they have a program in which if you're an outstanding student, they give you these scholarships. And I had to kind of beg my parents to please let me go to the school because I really wanted the chance to essentially get out of this unsafe space. And it worked out. I got the scholarship. I went to Parsons. I lived in New York for a few years, and then I eventually came here to CCA where I met Ro. But I think that the main issue that I was struggling with throughout my teenage years and then through my early time in New York, once I was away from where I lived, is that when something like that happens to you at such an early age, and you don't have any choice around it, you don't have any control around it, it really impacts the way you see everything. So when I was in New York, I spent a lot of time trying to discover who I am and what I understand about myself. And it's really easy to feel broken and feel like you don't fit in. Sorry. So, thank you. One vehicle for me was to start to understand myself through observing other people. And I was just obsessed with taking people's photographs. It became my main interest at Parsons, even though I was essentially a graphic design, I was in the graphic design, communication design track, and that was actually my degree. But I spent most of my time in the photography department. And I took a lot of photography electives, and one of the most kind of transitional electives for me was this elective called Picturing Sexuality. And it was really interesting because it started to talk about the role of photography through sexuality and the body. And for someone who suffered sexual trauma, your understanding of the body is very complex. Many times you try not to be in your body. So that was sort of like a vehicle for me to understand sort of where I was going and to start to explore other ways of seeing myself and seeing my body and seeing my own sexuality. And I spent a lot of time, and that's the nice thing about New York, it's such a rich place that you get to really, have a lot of things to be curious about. I then started digging in closer and starting photographing people in my life. This is a photograph of my mother. This is my sister. And I started creating this concept for what became my Parsons thesis about the self-concept. And it's really funny because I was collecting this. This is from 2007. I was collecting this for this presentation. I hadn't looked at this work in the context of Angsty. And then when I look at the work, I realized it's all kind of always been there. I started in this journey of trying to ask women all over, the campus, what was their experience of being a woman, what it felt like, how did they feel they were represented in media. And I realized I asked all these kind of questions about personal growth and how do you take care of yourself and how do you perceive yourself. And this is some of the photos that I took. Again, this is just me trying to be a photographer, but not really. But reflecting back on what I was trying to do, what I've asked the women is to come to a studio and bring any objects that represent their sense of identity, and to just stand there trying to be, as unique to their self-concept as they could be. And I see that now in the work that I'm doing, where I'm just trying to, understand myself through other people's stories. Something really interesting happened in New York. I met my husband, and we moved to Oakland, and I came to CCA, and I started to feel like my trauma history was starting to kind of fade into the background. One thing that was really helpful is that Parsons, which, I think it was the biggest blessing. Parsons considers all international students people who are in sort of a transitional period, so they give you free counseling. And I just found myself feeling really lost. One of the things I struggled with was just emotional unraveling, unable to be in relationship with a lot of people, kind of like what we call drama, a lot of drama. And by the time I got to the therapist, it was kind of bursting out of the seams that I just needed to tell someone what had happened to me. And I went through that, through that process at Parsons, and I kind of felt that, okay, I've done the work, I've met, my partner in crime, I'm kind of like, I'm healing, right? This is what's happening. And once I graduated from CCA, I got to work double italic. I felt like my career was taking off. I got to work at Salesforce. I got to work at Medium. I got to kind of be in a certain circle of my professional career where I felt like, okay, I'm an established designer, and I can actually do my best work now. But the thing that I didn't expect was that even though I felt like I kind of dealt with it, I really hadn't. And I want to read this quote too. What we leave incomplete, we are doomed to repeat. The untreated traumas of childhood become the frustrated dramas of adulthood. And what started to happen is that this sense of brokenness and this sense of disconnect started to play out in all my interpersonal relationships, even my closest ones. And I didn't really understand why that was happening. And it's something that not only played out in my personal life, also in my work life. Certain situations that I found threatening, or certain people that I found overwhelming, or certain things that just became kind of a little bit difficult to navigate. And I felt like, wait a second, like, this is really not, shouldn't be this big of a deal. Like, why do I feel this way? And one of the things that I learned, and is the thing that shocks me the most and probably gives me the most motivation for Angsty, is that we don't really have a strong understanding or education into the fabric of, our emotional inner lives. So I spent a lot of time educating myself because I didn't have any other access through, my therapy, and then eventually doing body work, reading. And what I didn't know was that the impact of the trauma had completely transformed my nervous system, have completely transformed the way my mind works, which means that I'm more sensitive and more vigilant and more in a state of stress than most people are. And it's that wiring that, interestingly enough, has fueled my work, because we have a workaholism issue, because it's one of the things that I struggle with. And many times we kind of just channel that energy through there. But what we leave behind is, what we understand about ourselves, and really the healing process of trying to, repair the damage caused. So this process of kind of seeing how my stress response is unique and is uniquely affected by my history helped me reframe, what I needed to do for myself to really start to repair and, live a fulfilling life, because no one wants to live a life of suffering. So one of the most influential books for me was the Complex PTSD book, because it really adds a lot of nuance on, what happens when, you grow up as a, neglected child who then, has an experience of abuse. What are the messages that you're receiving as a human in the world of what your life is worth and what you can accomplish? So I started to really think about, okay, the interesting thing about my experience is a lot of it is environmental because of actions that happened, and that you have the opportunity to rewire. And a lot of people do this with meditation and yoga. Talk therapy also helps with rewiring. So how can you bring back your nervous system, not to what it could have been, but to a place where you can have control of your inner experience. And for me, I think that what I'm working on right now is trying to be as self-aware as I can of the fact that this is how my body works because of these experiences that I've had, and how do I learn as much as I can about psychology and about psychoeducation and about other people's stories to sort of start to repair some of that. So I want to go back to Angsty and sort of show you a little bit of what we're doing with our latest issue. What I discovered is that I was spending a lot of time trying to, once I got to California and got to CCA and got into interaction design and got into the tech world and the ambitions of working at a startup and all these things, I started to get into this strain where I kind of aligned my self-worth with a lot of that. And I think that I started to lose my core, which is this focus on personal understanding through art. And I think that's what Angsty has become. It has become a channel for understanding other people's experiences in the hopes that it enriches not only me, but other people as well. And these are some of the articles we have. We have a combination of personal essays. This one's by Amanda Rosenberg. We also try to unpack some of the psychoeducation elements so that you can use it as forms of reflection, not as how to solve your life, because I actually think that this is a life's journey, but really how do you use that information to find coping mechanisms. Angsty launched with a Medium post where I shared some of this story. And I was just shocked, like the whole thing looks green, really, on sort of, how much of it was resonating for people. And what I was trying to say is like, look, this is not unique. I'm not an outlier. And that is the thing that upsets me the most. People want you to think that trauma survivors are outliers, and that's not true. 1 in 5, how many people are we here? Just think about, there's someone you're going to meet today who is carrying this story as well. So I wanted to share some of the things that people shared with me about Angsty. And let you read it for yourself. But what we're trying to do is create a space where those conversations are possible. Not because we're trying to solve it, not because we think there's a better way, just because we believe that you have the right to just sit in that experience and be able to take what you can from it. So this is our latest issue, and I want to leave you with this. Do you allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to become self-aware of what gives you a sense of meaning and purpose in your creative work? And I think what I discovered was that when I started to zone in into my story and my hurt and my grief, I really started to understand that I didn't want to become, the product designer of the year. I didn't want to, live a life in which art wasn't a central part of it. I really started to understand that that, for me, was a place of healing, and that I wanted to continue to go into that journey. And I really liked reading this quote because we have the opportunity, and this is where my hope is, that through the process of facing your pain and through the process of trying to understand how life has affected you, that you can transform yourself, not to fix yourself, but to become a closer version of a someone who feels self-fulfilled. So thank you.